I was on Twitter the other day, right? And somebody made a tweet that went semi-viral in the NFL community that said that the New York Giants are going to be the Cincinnati Bengals of the 2022 NFL season. And I laughed. And it's funny because people think what the Cincinnati Bengals did last season can be easily replicated. No, it cannot. And I guarantee you there will never be another NFL team to replicate what the Bengals did in 2021 ever again. You know, some things that occur in life are phenomenally. Just because I win the lottery doesn't mean everybody else is going to be able to win the lottery. Only 1% of people, maybe less than that, win the lottery. And only one team in the history of the NFL has ever been able to accomplish what the Bengals did last season. And that was Cincinnati. You're not going to find a team that's going to be able to make it to the Super Bowl with one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. You see, the difference between Cincinnati and the other teams who many people think can have the success that the Bengals had with terrible offensive line play is that the Bengals have Joe Burrow and those other teams don't have Joe Burrow. You see, Joe Burrow is different. And I've said this so many times, but I'm going to give the lecture again. Joe Burrow is cut from a different cloth. He's different. There aren't too many quarterbacks that are going to be able to go into their second season in the league and lead their team to the Super Bowl with one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. How many quarterbacks in the history of the NFL playoffs have been able to still lead their team to a playoff win despite being sacked 10 times? I'm waiting for an answer. You see, for Cincinnati last year, they were able to take advantage of favorable matchups in the playoffs. You played the Las Vegas Raiders, who didn't really have a great secondary. So no matter how many times you got put in third and long situations, you still were going to be able to convert because their secondary wasn't able to slow down the passing attack of Cincinnati. And their defense wasn't that great. So you faced the Las Vegas Raiders team that wasn't that great on defense. And then you played the Tennessee Titans in the divisional round of the playoffs, which also was a favorable matchup because their secondary wasn't that great. So, despite the fact that Cincinnati was put in so many third and long situations, they were still able to convert and get chunk yardage in that game despite giving up so many sacks. That was a matchup problem that Cincinnati was able to take advantage of. Same thing against the Kansas City Chiefs. They took advantage of a favorable matchup. Kansas City didn't have a great pass rush, didn't have a great secondary, and it was a large reason why they lost that game against Cincinnati. So we get to the Super Bowl, and on the final drive, when Cincinnati has one last opportunity of being able to win the championship, the bad offensive line play finally cost them. You see, what if Cincinnati would have played the Buffalo Bills, a team that had a really good secondary that would have been able to match up on paper against Cincinnati's talented group of wide receivers? You see, what Cincinnati did in 2021 will probably most likely never be replicated again. They had the perfect storm in a sense. And I'm not saying this to demean Cincinnati for what they did last season. I'm actually saying this to praise what Cincinnati did because what they accomplished last season is something that we most likely will never see again in this sport. Because the majority of teams that make it to the Super Bowl make it because, for one, they have good offensive line play. You see, if you cannot hold your own up front, more times than not, you're not making it no further than past the divisional round before you get smacked around. Because almost every single team that enters the conference championship has a good offensive line, more times than not. So for anybody out there who thinks that the Giants or any other team can kind of have the season that Cincinnati had with a bad offensive line, it's really hard to see that happening. Now, if you want to say, what team can be the Cinderella story of this season, I think that's a better way to word it. But to have the season that Cincinnati had with that bad off our offensive line, we most likely will never see it again. And I was talking to my guy, Juice Alert, because after that, he told me with what Joe Burrow did this past season, there's no excuse for any rookie quarterback anymore, regardless of how bad their offensive line is. And I told him, wait a minute. You're judging something that is a rarity in the NFL. At the end of the day, for a young quarterback to be successful, you have to build a good team around him, and it starts with what he has up front. And I told him, I said that not every quarterback coming out is going to be Joe Burrow. Now, if there are more quarterbacks that come out and prove me wrong and are able to take their team to the Super Bowl despite having a terrible offensive line, then okay, that can become the new standard. But we can't expect every team with a bad offensive line, just because they have a good group of wide receivers, to be able to pull off what Cincinnati did last year. It was kind of historical in a sense. Because imagine me telling you that Cincinnati, going into the 2021 NFL season, was going to win the Super Bowl. You know what you would have did? You would have laughed at me. You would have said, JT, you're crazy. But Cincinnati did it. They were able to take advantage of favorable matchups. You see, you have to always look at everything in context. And a lot of people aren't really looking at the context at what Cincinnati did last season. They just say, oh man, JT, Cincinnati went to the Super Bowl with a terrible offensive line. That means that now you can go to the Super Bowl with an offensive line that's not that great. You don't need to put that much money into it. If Cincinnati was able to pull off what they did last season again, they would have no reason to improve the offensive line. There is a reason why Cincinnati went out there and revamped the whole entire offensive line. I think that other than Jonah Williams, the Cincinnati Bengals have an entirely different group of starters walking into the season. They paid a lot of money during free agency to improve the offensive line and give Joe Burrow more protection. It's a reason for that. If they could have been able to replicate what they did last season, I guarantee you they would have kept the same offensive line and spent that money elsewhere, such as at corner. Maybe they would have used that money instead of on the offensive line on bringing in J.C. Jackson. Maybe trying to improve the interior of the defensive line. You see, we have to look at the context of things. We're so quick to hop on bandwagons. We're so quick to hop on trends that sometimes we just need to take a minute, take a deep breath, and think and contextualize everything that we just witnessed. Because what Cincinnati did last year was probably a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. And the main reason was because they had Joe Burrow at quarterback. There's no way you're going to tell me Daniel Jones is going to just all of a sudden go from being a borderline bust to being a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the league and being able to carry his offense despite not having a great offensive line like Joe Burrow was. If the New York Giants make it to the Super Bowl this year, which I highly doubt, it will be because, one, their offensive line was pretty good. 2, Daniel Jones stopped turning the football over. And 3, Daniel Jones became a top 5 quarterback. You see, so many people think just because one person does it, everybody else can do it. And everybody has to understand that everybody's road in life is different. It's always things that one person may be able to do that you may not be able to do. Just because Chris Johnson runs a 4.2 doesn't mean I can go out there and run a 4.2. Just because DK Metcalf is at less than 5% body fat doesn't mean that I can ever get below 5% body fat. So we have to stop looking at other people's success and thinking that it's easy replicable, because it's not. And I understand that the NFL is a copycat league, but certain things cannot be replicated in this sport. And if you think that there's going to be a team that can make it to the Super Bowl with a bad offensive line, I doubt it. So for me, I view the Cincinnati Bengals 2021 season as a phenomenon. I don't think it will ever happen again. And I would love for a team to prove me wrong. I really would. But more times than not, Most teams that have bad offensive line play, they make it into the postseason for one or two reasons. One, their division was pretty weak, and they were able to overcome not having a tough division, such as what Houston was able to do on a couple of occasions. And two, they don't really make it no further than the divisional round. Because eventually, the deeper you get into the postseason, the better offensive line play and defensive line play that you're going to find. Look at who the Bengals played in the AFC Championship game last year. They played the Kansas City Chiefs, who had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, but they didn't have the pass rush and they didn't have the secondary to slow down Cincinnati's offense. Look at the NFC Championship game. You had the 49ers and the Rams. Both of those two teams had top 10 offensive lines. And you want to go back further, okay, think about the Buccaneers. Had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. If you go back to the last 10 conference championship games for both the AFC and NFC conferences, almost every single team is going to have a good offensive line. So if you cannot win up front, more times than not, you're not going to be able to win a championship. Because that's one of the key formulas to being able to have success in this league. It's been proven time in and time out. So for Cincinnati, I think that we just need to admire what the fact they did last season and just appreciate it, because what they did is probably never going to be seen ever again. As I mentioned earlier, it's a reason why Cincinnati revamped the offensive line and put a lot of money into it. Because if they could have looked at it how a lot of people are looking at it on Twitter and say, you know what, if we made it to the Super Bowl with a bad offensive line last season, we can do it again. It's a reason why they paid for La'el Collins, Alex Kappa. So let me know how you guys feel about Cincinnati's 2021 season. Do you guys disagree with me? Do you guys think that there is a good possibility that another team can pull off what Cincinnati did last season and make it to the Super Bowl with a bad offensive line? Let me know down in the comment section down below.